the Justice Department moves to unseal the warrant that led to the FBI's search of Mar-a-Lago, one conservative group is looking at filing an ethics complaint against the judge who signed off on the warrant. And we've got some breaking news just in. Let's bring in former FBI Special Agent Stuart Kaplan from the NGO considering that ethics complaint. Article 3 Project President Mike Davis and former federal prosecutor Francie Hakes. So glad we've got all of you standing by because we just got this statement from former President Trump. He says this: not only will I not oppose the release of documents related to what he calls the un-American, unwarranted, and unnecessary raid and break-in of my home in Palm Beach, Florida, Mar-a-Lago, I am going a step further by encouraging the immediate release of those documents, even though he says they've been drawn up by radical left Democrats and possible future political opponents who have a strong and powerful vested interest in attacking me, much as they have done for the last 6 years. It goes on to make a lot of political statements as well. But Francie, let's start there, because my understanding is what the Attorney General said today that he would move to release is the warrant and the list of items that were taken from the home. President Trump's team already has that. I know there's a different push to get the underlying documents from some private groups, including the New York Times. But if this is the same set of documents the Attorney General said he would move to unseal, couldn't the Trump team just release them themselves?
Yeah, Shannon, they really can. Although President Trump does have a point, the person who drew up the documents is certainly going to, or was certainly aware that those documents would be publicly scrutinized and quickly, because they knew that it is the law that those documents be left at the search scene at Mar-a-Lago. So he's right that they were drawn up by someone who might want the public to think there's an adverse inference. And those warrants, Shannon, as you know, it's just a face sheet. Mm-hmm. It's literally a form. And on the form is going to be the possible charge that they're searching for evidence of, the location to be searched, the judge's name, the AUSA or trial lawyer's name, and the agent's name. That's really about it. So there's not going to be much information on that or on the receipt, which is just going to say things like, here, we're giving you a receipt for this 12 boxes we took today. That'll be about all it says.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, not a lot of detail there. But at the same time, Mike, we have these private groups that are pushing for all the underlying documentation, affidavits as well. And all of these requests are going to that magistrate judge who issued the initial warrant. How much of this do you think he'll be willing to release?
It's unclear, and the problem with this judge down in Florida in Palm Beach, his name is Magistrate Judge Bruce Reinhart, is he is conflicted here. He's clearly conflicted here. He has Facebook posts from 2017 where he's personally criticizing President Trump. He was appointed as a magistrate judge in 2018 by the other judges in the Southern District of Florida. He just recused 6 weeks ago on the lawsuit between Trump versus Hillary Clinton, but somehow this conflict of interest went away when this magistrate judge Reinhart signed this highly unusual, this unprecedented, I would say unlawful search warrants, unnecessary and unlawful search warrant of a former president in his home and office.
And Stuart, you explain for us, what I understand is that your group is considering filing an ethics complaint against that federal magistrate?
We're digging into it. It's unclear whether outside groups can file, outside people or groups can file ethics complaints against federal judges when it comes to recusal issues. But that being said, this federal judge clearly has violated the United States Code along with the judicial canons by having an appearance of conflict here, if not an actual conflict, when he has publicly went on Facebook and criticized President Trump and his integrity, and then he's now deciding he now decided this search warrant matter after he recused from the Trump versus Clinton lawsuit 6 weeks ago.
Okay, so Stuart, why wouldn't a federal magistrate, and listen, when I used to be in practice, dealt with them commonly, they have the powers that a federal judge has to issue these warrants. It's very commonplace, but in something this delicate and that would get this much scrutiny, why wouldn't the magistrate consider it maybe kicking it to a different district judge or another federal judge for handling?
Well, I mean, look, I guess the theory maybe is that whether or not the Attorney General did what they consider as judge shopping, whether or not they believe that this magistrate sitting in West Palm Beach would have been the target, that they would have felt that he was more likely than not to sign off on this warrant. I just want to say I personally know Magistrate Bruce Reinhart. I knew him when he was an assistant United States attorney. I knew when he left and he was in private practice, and I certainly have appeared before him as a United States magistrate judge. And notwithstanding, what the guest has said with respect to his Facebook posting, I do believe that this judge, his integrity is beyond reproach. I've never seen him do anything that I would believe would somehow question his ethics or his integrity. Now, with that being said, I am a little concerned as to whether or not there were some efforts that may have misled him down this, rabbit hole, and whether or not that may need to be further looked into with respect to whether or not he was more victimized to be used in a ruse to sign off on this warrant.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot.
That's the only thing I can speculate.
Yeah, there's a lot we don't know.
know.
If we get to those underlying affidavits and documents, and we can understand how people would be skeptical over the last few years, knowing that there were things presented to courts. Francie, we've talked about this, like to the FISA court, that wasn't accurate. Some of it was falsified. To get information, the judge can only act on the information in front of them and make a decision from there. Meanwhile, tonight, the Washington Post is reporting they say FBI searched Trump's home to look for nuclear documents, and they're citing sources for that. They say one former Justice Department official who in the past oversaw investigations of leaks of classified information said the type of top secret information described by the people familiar with the probe would probably cause authorities to try to move as quickly as possible to recover sensitive documents that could cause grave harm to U.S. security. Francie, what do you make of that? Because the AG said today we try to do the least intrusive method for retrieving the things we're looking for.
Shannon, this makes me really angry because you had both Chris Wray and the Attorney General come out today with statements lauding the people of the FBI and the Department of Justice. You can trust them. They have integrity. They protect the American people. They just do their job. And while that is true for a lot of them, we know from the last 6 years it is not true of all of them. Look at Larry Nassar. Look at the Gretchen Whitmer case. And now you have leaks. People familiar with the probe, Shannon, what that means. That means agents involved in the probe or the DOJ lawyers. It can't be anybody else. And so they are leaking now to try to damage the president, to make President Trump look bad, to make their investigation look necessary and important. Well, if it's really necessary and important, then by God, release the affidavit so we can all see the allegations that were made instead of letting this nuclear secrets garbage just sit. I mean, I suppose there's a chance that it's real, but given the last 6 years, Shannon, can we really trust the leakers to tell us the truth? I don't. I just don't.
Well, after the AG's remarks today, I was left with more questions than answers. I'm guessing the three of you as well. Thank you for being with us tonight for a late night analysis. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Shannon.